I like what I do. I just like to write. I like to create. So that's the fun part. I don't mind looking at a blank page and thinking about all right, what can I do next? So it's a challenge. It's a puzzle. You're being hired to create a puzzle, an emotional puzzle, and you're not given the top of the box to look at to see what it looks like. You have to create the puzzle and hope that you put all the pieces together in the right way.
Welcome to the Funny in Failure podcast, a podcast that celebrates failure and shines the light on the emotional side of comedy, with yours truly, Michael Kahan.
Welcome. Today's guest has a calming and relaxed manner about him, with a great, meaningful, and positive message. It is simply mesmerizing and inspiring. I could listen to him talk for many hours. I love Jim's forward-moving mindset and mentality you can see that has kept him in good steads for over 40 plus years in the industry. He's a veteran of the business who has accomplished so much, more than any human should be able to do. It was an absolute joy to dive deep into his ethos on life, and I appreciate Jim for coming on for a chat. Okay, so let's get into it. Jim Kouf is a writer, director, producer, and showrunner. He recently wrapped up the series GRIMM for NBC, which had a successful 6-year run where he served as not only the co-showrunner and producer, as well as the writer, and even directed a few episodes himself. His first feature films, co-written with David Greenwalt, were Class, American Dreamer, and Secret Admirer. He also wrote The Hidden under the pseudonym Bob Hunt. Jim made his directorial debut with Miracles, starring Tom Conti, Teri, Garr, and Christopher Lloyd. In 1985, Jim moved to the Disney lot, where he began a partnership with Lynn Bigelow to form Kouf Bigelow Productions, who later became his wife. During that time, Jim wrote and produced STAKEOUT and another STAKEOUT. He also wrote and directed Disorganized Crime and co-wrote Operation DUMBO DROP. Kouf Bigelow Productions executive produced California, starring Brad Pitt and Juliette Lewis, Silent Fall, starring Richard Dreyfuss and Liv Tyler, as well as Conair, starring Nicolas Cage. Jim also wrote and directed Gang Related, starring Jim Belushi, Tupac, and Dennis Quaid, to name a few, as well as co-wrote Rush Hour, starring Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker, Snow Dog, starring Cuba Gooding and James Coburn, and Taxi, starring Queen Latifah and Jimmy Fallon. He's also worked in television producing and writing with David Greenwalt for Angel, and writing and producing on The Handler. His last Disney release was National Treasure, starring Nicolas Cage, National Treasure 2 and National Treasure Edge of History, which was based on his characters created, was released in 2007 and 2022 respectively. In 2007, Jim co-wrote and directed the independent film A Fork in the Road, starring Jamie King, Silas Ware Mitchell, and Josh Cook. Jim has also executive produced and written for the series Ghost Whisperer, starring Jennifer Love Hewitt. In 2016, Money Monsters was released, which he co-wrote, starring George Clooney and Julia Roberts. So as you can imagine, we dive deep and we cover a lot, and we chat about life-changing poker games, GRIMM, and the fan base, collaborating with creatives and his wife, plus what makes it a success, his ranch, writing screenplays that hold up, breaking into the industry, picking your battles, moving forward, and bad ideas. Before we get into this chat, in case you aren't aware, the videos are now available on YouTube under Michael Kahan. That's Kahan with a K, unless you're listening to it already. I'll still be posting snippets of these chats on Instagram under Funny and Failure, so check them out if you want to stay in the loop for upcoming episodes, or you want to ask a guest a question. I'd also love it if you would share the podcast or share your takeaways from the chat. It really motivates me, helps the podcast grow, and ensures I can lock in amazing guests like this one. And just as a final reminder, the podcast comes out every Monday at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, with the video to follow the following day. Anyway, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's epic episode. I'm going to keep it vague and we'll see how we go. I'd love to hear, I think this was about roughly 40 years ago, about a poker game that changed your life. You met some people. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. It wasn't a particular poker game. I don't remember. We used to play poker. We were all starving artists in Westwood near UCLA. And I was living with a buddy of mine who I'd gone to high school with. And he was in the mail room. We all decided we wanted to be in show business about the same time. I had wanted to be a writer. Mike had wanted to be a producer, Michael Meltzer. And I think he got the first job at NBC as a page, seating people for the Johnny Carson show. Anyway, the guys, and through Michael, I met Dan Petrie Jr., and through Dan Petrie Jr., I met David Greenwalt. And Dan Petrie Jr. Do you want this long story?
Yeah. I think yeah, definitely.
All right. So Dan was in the mailroom at ICM. And when ICM had just formed from IFA, International Famous Agency, and CMA, Creative Management Agency, to form ICM. So his dad, Dan Petrie, was a director who was represented by this legendary agent, Jack Gilardi. And Dan was sending out scripts. And well, anyway, I met David Greenwalt through Dan. So Dan represented David and I, represented me as a single writer and David as a single writer. But so we were writing, on our own. And then Dan got, Jack Gilardi used to get all the guys who were doing the cheapest of cheapest movies. So, and we were members of the Writers Guild. So Dan one day got David Niven Jr. had bought a book called Shall We Tell the President? I think it was a Jeffrey Archer book. And he didn't want to pay a lot of money for a screenplay. So he went to Gilardi. And Gilardi apparently went to Dan and said, who you got that's cheap? And so Dan had one job and he had two clients, me and David Greenwalt. So he sold us as a team. We'd never written anything together. So we quickly decided how to work together to figure out how to do this story. And that's how David and I met. And then we wound up working together for years.
Isn't it wild, first of all, to just go, who's the cheapest that you've got? You're like, pick me.
I think we got $5,000
each, or
which we split.
Oh, yeah. Wow. So what was that feeling like? Because you're basically meeting perhaps a stranger for the first time. Now you have to figure out a working relationship. But now you've got your big break and you've actually got money and you're probably thinking, yeah, I can actually get a career out of this. Oh, yeah. No, we were very excited to get paid for something. We could actually pay our rent. No, David and I, well, we wrote, on our own. So we just figured out, let's read the book and then let's work on an outline together. And then we'll split it up. You take part of it and I'll take part of it. Then we'll come back together, throw everything together, and then we'll rewrite it together. And then we'll get a script. So it made sense. And that's what we did. And then it's crazy that from that experience that you've been collaborating for like 40 years? Was that 40 years ago? Yeah. Also, we had so much fun working with David Niven Jr., who was a blast to work with. He was just a lot of fun. So I'm wondering at that stage, so I'm still a bit not clear, did you know David before and then you met him at this poker game, or you knew of him in the poker game and then everything? No, we met at the poker game. Oh. We met at the poker game. So we were all, none of us had any money. So, we were all betting 25 cents. So it was not a big deal. It wasn't a matter of really trying to win any money. It was really a matter of that's all we could afford to do, buy beer and go to somebody's apartment and play poker. That's so interesting. So and then in terms of... I think the original group was Dan Ostroff, who became an agent,
Michael Meltzer, who became a producer, Dan Petrie Jr., who went on to be a writer after a career as an agent, and then David Greenwalt and myself.
Okay, I've got 10,000 questions. We're going to have to see how this works through. But you mentioned from the collaboration side that you just, you met this person kind of for the first time and now you have to, work together to create something. Was it a hard adjustment to work with someone? Because you would have been writing probably in a vacuum up until then. Would it just probably have been you and now you
No, I mean, we were both personable people and, we got along. And so it was no big deal. And it was a chance to earn some money. So yeah, we figured it out.
Because it's always interesting from the writing side. I do screenwriting. Everyone that I speak to, you write a lot of scripts, you read a lot of scripts, it's done in a vacuum. And then it seems, there's to the next level, you're in a writer's room or you have to work with producers. And now not only do you need to be a good writer, but now you actually need to collaborate in ideas, which a lot of writers seem to be introverted. And that might be a little bit, not only do you have to be a good writer, you actually have to work with people, maybe not just one person, a team of writers, for example. Was that always an easy adjustment?
I never really had a problem because I also wrote by myself, and I wrote with David, and I also wrote with Dan Petrie Jr., and I've written with Al DiFiore. So what David and I discovered after doing about, oh my God, we got hired to write probably 10 movies, 10 scripts together. And what we learned, we got hired to do a low-budget rewrite on a movie called The Lawnmower Killer, which became Wacko.
Yeah.
So we got paid a lot of money, but we had to do it in 2 weeks.
Whoa.
So David lived in this funky little apartment on like Fountain Avenue in Hollywood. So we'd meet at his apartment, and basically, it was really tiny. I mean, I think he stood in the hallway while I was in the other room. I can't even remember. But we decided we had to write this script together in the same room at the same time, right? Because we had no other time to do it. And we had so much fun that from that point on, we just wrote everything at the same time in the room together. Nice. And that was a blast. We had a lot of fun.
That's great to hear. And in terms of, when you've got 2 weeks, you hear it, that's like maybe a turnaround for like one script, not a movie. Well, less than 2 weeks, but you know what I'm saying. 2 weeks.
You just crank it.
No sleep, just eating noodles. What was the process like there? Just, we don't have time.
No, we just worked. David and I have always worked sort of just normal hours, and then we'd go out to dinner or whatever. And, if we needed to, we'd come back and go to work again. But, he was always easygoing and I was easygoing. So it was never really an issue.
What about in terms of, I don't know if you feel this way, but I know that especially with all my scripts, there's a perfectionism element. It has to be perfect, especially when you're first starting out. It has to be perfect when you're going to show it to someone. When you've got a deadline like 2 weeks, for example, or you've got these other roles, did you have any of that? Or was just, I'm going to do the best job and...
Well, when you're writing a script called The Lawnmower Killer, perfection is something you really don't worry about.
So you always had a bit of a sense of humor with it?
Oh, yeah.
That's hilarious.
I mean, how perfect can you make that, So, I mean, we started doing, a lot of comedy, so it was fun.
And wouldn't that also take away a little bit of the pressure? One of the earlier things that you've done, you've got a title like this. You probably already have a rough idea already from the conversations you've had. Now you need to write something a bit goofy. Does that take away the pressure? It's not like a procedural fantasy like some of the other stuff you've done later on.
Well, we knew it was not going to be a studio movie. I mean, we weren't in the studio business yet. It was a low-budget film. We were being paid for 2 weeks, and really, our job was to do as good a job as we could within the amount of time we had.
Yep.
So, and it was a goofy comedy to begin with. So, goofiness was fine. And if they wanted changes, we'd make changes. It really didn't matter. I mean, we were open to anything.
Do you look back at some of these things and rewatch them?
I don't know that I'd rewatch that one, but
have a family.
Later on, we've gone back and rewatched stuff to make sure to see how does it hold up.
Oh, interesting. So is this with your family or writing team, or just you to just see how you've gone over the years?
Yeah, well, it's me or with my kids or with my wife, who was also my producing partner.
Yep.
Lynn Lynn started work with David and me at Paramount when we had our Paramount deal.
Gotcha.
So it's been a long time.
I would love to know, like, when you've written something like 20 years ago, then you watch it again, what you're noticing that in this time and age. I'm not talking about like if it's holding up, just you've grown as a writer, you've grown from the production side, you've grown from all these elements. What are you looking for when you rewatch something of yours?
I think we always look for the same thing. I don't think we've changed much. We've always been fairly cynical. And one thing I've discovered over the years is cynicism holds up better than just about anything.
Okay.
If you watch Billy Wilder, you know, his early work, cynicism holds up better than just about anything. You know, some comedy holds up. It's just got to be sharp. And one thing that David and I never put in our scripts or tried to avoid was anything that was of the moment. Because we felt that I mean, you could get away with it in comedy, I guess, if you were doing something and the jokes were of that time period. But you got to remember, these movies have a long life. And the jokes that you put in today may not play in 10 years or 20 years. So we always had in mind, you know, our movies lasting for a long time. So we always avoided anything that was timely.
Is there a lot of people are worried when they've done something like 10, 20, 30 years ago that it might not hold up and they might be, you know, might come out and then they'll look bad. Are you looking through the fear blinkers or more you just want the movie to hold up in something that we could watch 20 years later? Was a combination of
we wanted to hold up and have somebody watch it 20 years later and still enjoy it. But if you have references that are only for that, you know, that 1 year, people 20 years from now won't know that reference.
Yeah, Seinfeld's the only thing that I've seen where they've got the references, but even still, I don't fully get. There's very minor ones, but it's like that's the exception to the rule. Everything else,
probably,
yeah.
But you can watch a Billy Wilder movie now, which was one of our heroes. You know, Billy Wilder and Brackett and I.L. Diamond, whoever he was writing with at the time. His stuff can be pretty cynical, and the comedy still holds up because it's true to the characters in that moment and not necessarily of that time period. You know, the comedy, the dialogue would still hold up today.
That's quite, when you first, you know, when you're doing anything, you don't necessarily think that far ahead. I'm very surprised. Sometimes you just want to get something out there, you know, do the best of your ability, but you had that like very forward thinking mindset. Was it just very obvious to you at the time? Because I haven't heard anyone quite say it like you over the whole journey to think.
It's always been the way I think. I think what happens to this in 10 years? Well, it's because I'm an old movie buff. I know old movies and I still watch old movies. And what holds up? What doesn't hold up? You know, I've always been aware of that. I grew up on those old, those old movies.
Well, I heard that you saw a movie in your, I don't know if you're in college or you're a kid, but you saw Wild Bunch. And that kind of changed a little bit.
Well, the Wild Bunch, there's other. Let me talk about the first movie I really remember seeing, or several movies, in my youth, because I would rush home, and we had what they call the early show on TV.
Yep.
After, you know, right after I got out of elementary school, and I'd rush home to see these movies. And, you know, the ones I would really love are the Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan movies, because there was that adventure. But the one movie that really hit me was not a movie that I really recognized until later in life. It was The Third Man with Orson Welles and Joseph Cotten. I remembered some of those images, and I watched that movie as a kid, and then I rewatched it, you know, in my 20s and realized, oh my God, this is the movie I saw when I was a kid that stuck with me. So that was one of the movies that I think is a perfect film and still holds up. And the dialogue still holds up and everything holds up. But the Wild Bunch I saw in high school when it first came out. I took a date. I just saw the ad in the LA Times, you know, and had all these guys in it. I thought, oh yeah, I love those guys. I'll go watch that movie. And then it was sold out except for the front row.
Oh, that's tough.
So that movie in the front row was jolting. No one had ever seen anything like that at the time. I mean, that movie changed movies, changed violence in movies. I mean, you can see the precursor like in Bonnie and Clyde and a little before that, but The Wild Bunch really took it to another level, and violence in movies never was the same again after that. But anyway, I walked out of the theater. I didn't care much about my date at the time. I was
just
going,
thinking that
that's what I want to do for a living.
you
So
could have,
it changed
yeah, sorry,
my thought process. You know, I said, how do I do that? That was so monumental to me.
was it like this moment where you just, you know, you've left the matrix, you've just seen something, it's changed your whole life, this is
Yeah,
something that you really want to do. Meanwhile, your date's just like, so how did you enjoy the day? And you
I'm
just,
here. I'm over here.
and you're like, so you're just like going
Wait
through
a minute.
something.
I'm changing my life here.
Yeah. So did it really have such a powerful impact that, is that what made you want to get in? Did it give you like the confidence to try and pursue this, or you already knew you were going
Well,
to?
that gave me I mean, that's when I really said I want to be in the movie business. Now, in high school, because I had been a photographer, I was on the school paper. I'd always had a camera in my hands from a young age. And I always, you know, I was in the dark room. I developed my own film. I printed my own prints. And I made 2 movies in high school. One, I convinced my chemistry teacher to allow me to make a film instead of writing a term paper. And he
How does that
agreed,
work?
because I'm sure he just agreed because he didn't want to read another term paper. So I did a film about the day in the life of 3 brothers, right? And it was about, and I was working with 8mm cameras and no sound. So the sound had to go on later. But we did, the 3 brothers and the chemistry they experienced throughout the day. And of course, I had a girlfriend dress up as a wild animal, and she was in the closet of our room, and we had to go hunt down this wild animal. So I got my dad's shotgun and pretended to shoot this animal, but then I animated the
You could animate then.
bullet coming
Wow.
out of the gun, and then the chemical composition of what happened when gunpowder ignited.
Wow.
So then I continued to do that throughout the movie. So whenever we did something, there was a chemical composition that would happen based on, what we just did. Now, it was bizarre because I never animated anything. I just realized you just had to do one frame at a time, change your thing slightly, one frame at a time, and it was a process because I had no equipment really except an 8mm camera that I could do one frame at a time on, and kept changing my drawings.
How did you figure out how to do that? Because you don't have Google, YouTube. There's, it's not as common there.
Well, I knew there was enough. I knew how animation worked. It was one image at a time because there's 24 frames a second. So you had 24 frames to deal with for every second of film you shot. So nobody told me how to do anything. I just took a camera, I started drawing pictures, and I animated everything. So the chemical composition would appear on the screen, not all at once, but it would appear as the gunpowder. I animated smoke coming out of the barrel of the gun as the chemical composition went across the screen. So, yeah.
You're downplaying how amazing this is because, you've spoken to a lot of people where over the podcast journey where, at least they've had like an iPhone or another camera. Back when you were starting, it wasn't exactly that easy to get a camera, a good camera especially, and then to go and explore where you probably didn't have any help and you just kind of figured it out along the way. That is quite brilliant. Were you just a curious kid?
Well, I knew enough about cameras, because I'd shot a lot of still photography, black and white or color or whatever. I did have the fortune of having it because I grew up in Burbank, California. So there was a makeup man down the street, and the guy next door was a camera operator. And whenever I had a particular question about something, I would go ask him. Ed Hearn was his name.
Yep.
And Ed would, you know, it was a little later in life when I actually went to Ed for more advice about, you know, he gave me I got a 16 millimeter camera at one point to shoot with. And he gave me some editing, 8 millimeter editing stuff, because I had the reels on this thing. And I had to, you know, in editing an 8 millimeter film, you're like, cut it, and then either glue, you have to scrape off the emulsion and then glue it. Because tape came later. I don't remember if I used tape or glue.
Oh, wow.
When I edited that one. And then I had to add sound to it later. We had to do a reel-to-reel tape and then match it to the actual footage of the film and turn them on at the same time. It was rather complicated. And it didn't always match. But then I wound up showing it, you know, I showed it to the chemistry teacher, and he wanted me to show it to all the chemistry classes. And then, of course, the English department got a hold of it, and I had to show it to all the English department. So it was a fairly famous film at the time in high school.
I'm sure the confidence was running very high at the time as well. Was it like a little spark to go, yeah, you know what, I'm moving forward, I can do this?
No, I never really thought about that. I just thought, you know, when I set out to do something, I just felt, well, I should be able to do this. It's not that hard.
I like that. I like that mindset. And what was your family thinking at the time? Because I don't know where you stand, but they may have thought it would have been quite a risky job to pursue, especially the unknown.
Oh, that was after I graduated from college and came back and said I want to be a writer.
At college, you were studying history and something else, I believe.
So English. I was an English major, history minor. Okay. But the most important class for me is I had a playwriting class, which they no longer have. Yep. But it was in the playwriting class I was able to finally put, oh, that's how actors know what to say and do. Mm. So it was, Wild Bunch was the film, but it was my playwriting class that I finally put 2 and 2 together.
It's all connected.
And I kept getting A's on the plays I wrote. So, and then I had a senior project that I had to do, and I wrote a play, which for me was not, you know, everybody else is suffering through their senior projects, doing all sorts of reports on this and that and the other. And I just wrote a play, and I got an A on it. So I thought, well, maybe I can make a living at this if I'm getting A's in this. You know, I mean, I had a lot to learn, obviously.
But just even that knowing that there's some, you know, recognition that you're doing something. And from the oh no, go on.
Oh, so it's really, that's when I said, okay, I want to be a writer in Hollywood. And I left college, I graduated, went back home, and said I want to be a writer in film or TV. It didn't really matter at that point. I didn't even know but I didn't know what a script looked like. I didn't know what a film script looked like. So my dad knew somebody who worked at Universal, so he got me an old John Wayne script called The Hellfighters.
Oh, wow.
So I had to learn how to write a script by looking at a script. I didn't know what EXT meant, exterior. I didn't know what INT meant, interior. And then I had this, you know, if you're inside a room, then are you outside the room in a hallway? No. Exterior means outside of anything.
I'm still learning that. So I remember when I first read a script, I got this like screenwriting Bible, which is probably like 300 pages. And I read quite a complicated script. I forget which one it was. And I had to go over and read this whole, it was like a dictionary on screenwriting. And yeah, it's quite interesting because when you're writing a book, for example, and we'll get into it in a second, it is very different. You know, you just want to, you know, dialogue a bit of action, and that's it. Whereas you can paint a picture in a book with 10 pages long, but I think the general rule is like 4 lines depending on the scene. And I found it like a completely different modality. I don't know if you ever thought that as well.
Well, no, because I started with plays.
Ah, yes.
So plays to screenwriting is not that different.
Yeah.
Because you're only giving what you need on the set.
Yep.
You know, if it's important, you put it in. If it's not important, you leave it out.
And then from back to the family side. So when you told your parents that, you know, you've gone to college and now you want to pursue screenwriting, how did they receive that?
They were just like, give it a shot, you know? I mean, because it wasn't as if I wasn't going to go get a job. So, you know, I just got jobs that I could do, you know, to just support my, you know, screenwriting habit.
And
So it took me about 2.5 years before I finally started making a living.
that's what that I also found this really intriguing. You know, you hear people where they can get their big breaks after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. We've had it all. And 2 years, 2.5 years, that's pretty quick. What were you thinking then?
Well, I went to school with a couple of women whose dad was Buzz Knutson, who was a sound mixer, and he won Academy Awards for Cabaret and Exorcist. So Buzz was very high up in the business. So I went to Buzz and I said, I want to be a writer. And he said, well, let me introduce you to somebody who might be able to help you.
That's
And
nice.
she had been a TV writer, but then became an industrial filmmaker, doing films for different companies for various reasons. So he introduced me to Callie Curtis, and I went into Callie and said, I want to be a writer. And she said, well, go write something and then bring it to me. Pick out your favorite TV show and go write a script for it.
Oh, wow.
So she was testing me, you know.
Yeah.
So I said, well, my favorite TV show at the time was MASH. So I went home and I came up with a story idea, and I got a TV script to look at to see what it looked like. And so I wrote a script and brought it into her, and she said, okay, this is good. I like it. Write another one. So I went back, picked up another story, figured out another story, and wrote another script, took it back to her, and says, okay, this is good. Write another one. So she was just testing me to see if I had the stamina. You know, I didn't know at the time, but the stamina and the creativity to just keep doing it.
Yeah.
So I wrote 3 probably within about a month. And she said, okay, these are good. I'm going to see if I can get you an agent. So she sent him over to an agent at CMA at the time, who was Peter Senek. And Peter wanted to represent me. So all of a sudden I had an agent. And he started sending me out on meetings and stuff like that. But to break into the television business at that time was almost impossible. Because I wrote, it was a closed shop. You know, unless you'd written anything in TV, they really didn't want you. They weren't looking for new people.
Yeah.
So the only real way for me to break in was to continue to write features until one broke. But, you know, within a month, CMA merged with IFA, International Famous Agency, to become ICM, and my new agent just got fired. So I was back on the street.
Sorry for cutting you off. Just, you know, you've spoken about, you know, getting 3 scripts out, which is already quite hard. You know, you're working to prove to the lady that you can do this. You finally get an agent, and now the agent's been fired. That's a whirlwind of emotions.
Yeah. So I was back on the street, back to struggling, back to, you know, trying to figure out, all right, how do I break into this business? And I contacted Elliot Webb, who was another agent at the time. I contacted Elliot and said, do you want to represent me? He said, no, not really. So, you know, even that didn't work for me. And now I became, you know, friendly with Elliot later in life. But, you know, I really just had to get back at it and keep writing. I wrote 11 TV scripts that didn't get anything for me. And I wrote 6 feature scripts. You know, some of them were junk because I was just trying stuff. But I finally wrote one that Dan Petrie Jr. handed to his mom, who was a producer. And so that was Dorothea Petrie. The Petrie family was very helpful in the beginning. Dan Petrie was a great guy, and Dorothea Petrie was wonderful. And she taught me the value of rewriting. So she made me, for $500, I rewrote that script for about 10 times for her. And she never got it made, but eventually got made for TV. And it's not a very good movie, but, you know, it helped pave the way for other work, because the script got to be good enough where people would read the script and they say, look, we don't want to make this script, but we want you to rewrite a script that we have. So either I got into the rewrite business or David and I got into the rewrite business.
It's a wild story. I'm also very intrigued because often when we, you know, we got this passion to write, and then there's, you know, as we said, that whirlwind of emotion, and then you've got this agent, and then he's lost his job, and then you've tried to get other work through another agent, and there's a lot of rejection happening. Did that deter you? Did that throw you? Or you're like, I just have to keep on putting pen to paper?
Well, I think because I was so new at the game, this is in the first 2.5 years, I still was trying to figure out how to write well. So fortunately, because I had a friend in the mailroom at ICM, that was Dan, that was a little later, And so Dan became our first representative in the, representing us in the mailroom under Jack Gilardi's, tutelage. I was able to get a lot of scripts to read.
Nice.
From the ICM library. So almost anything I wanted, Dan could get me a copy of. So I just read a lot of the scripts that were getting made. And, I realized, these are very, well-crafted scripts that are getting made. So I realized I just had to work a little harder to figure out how to, craft a movie, just to structure a movie and to write dialogue.
See, I find this very intriguing. I know this is a testament. I'm trying to understand the mindset of how someone thrives in the business for 40 plus years, and you're answering it really well. We see a lot of times that whether it's playing a guitar or anything, that when we try something and there's a little bit of rejection at the start, we can just say it's not for me and give up. But despite some of these roadblocks, it doesn't seem to have really impacted you. You just kind of pivoted another way. Was that kind of the thinking? You knew you were going to do this, so you're just going to figure out the best path and how to do it.
Yeah, no, I was committed, So I don't care if people say no. I mean, that just means they didn't like that particular script. But that's not the only script I'm going to write. Not every script I've written has gotten made into a movie. Yep. Some are going to get made and some aren't going to get made. That's just the rule.
Do you have any scripts that are, on the shelf where you really think it can be made and you're really passionate about it? Or once you've got that no, you just kind of put on the back burner?
No, there's one that I still think would make a great movie. That's the one I'm writing the book about.
Oh, gotcha.
And there's still a couple of books I've read that I think would make great movies that I'm still carrying around, trying to figure out, can these be made? And there's one that I just wrote that we're trying to find financing for. There's about 3 or 4 that actually we're trying to find financing for. So you never know. The most important thing for a writer to do, I think, is to create a library of work.
Yeah.
Because you'll never know what somebody's looking for. And if you write a great script, doors will open. And people will ask you, and they'll either say, I want to make this movie, or I don't want to make this one. What else you got?
Yes.
So I would always write, even when I had an overall deal with a studio, I would still write a spec script just for the fun of it. Because I liked it. Because I like to do it. Because I also know that I hate pitching. And pitching, you take a chance of, they're going to steal your ideas or whatever they're going to do. They just say no. So I've always taken a risk. I'll just write a spec script because then at least I own it. And if it doesn't get made tomorrow, maybe it'll get made in 10 years. You just don't know. But, if I believe in a story, I'm willing to try it because I like writing.
That's the key because some people get into the business and obviously, to be in the business for 40 plus years, you kind of have this mindset where want to be like rich and famous or just write a few scripts and we'll be living in our mansion. But, that's not the long-term success mindset you're talking about.
I'm a movie lover.
Yeah.
I love movies and I always have. So my thing is always, I want to make movies. It's not, whether I get paid big money or little money, it doesn't matter. It's the process and the experience. That's why I became a producer and a director too.
And I got 1,000 questions on that as well. Did you ever consider acting?
I acted when I was younger, but I never really got thrilled about memorizing a bunch of lines. I have no trouble writing a bunch of lines, which I find much more fascinating than memorizing a bunch of lines and doing it over. No, that wasn't the appeal to me.
The stress. So I've written a few screenplays that I'm waiting to get made. We'll see what happens with the writer's strike. And the thought of having to memorize more than a sentence, it genuinely terrifies me. Maybe I can do it.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
But you have to do it, and then sometimes you get the script a few hours before, you have to change it. I don't know how, and you've worked with so many different people. That does not make me feel so excited to remember a whole script and get it done in, let's say, a week, because I just be so.
That's why,
yeah.
That's why actors are actors and writers are writers.
Yes, exactly.
There's very little crossover that way. The crossover for writer becomes when you become a producer director.
Can you expand on that?
Well, when we were writing movies, we didn't always agree with what the director did or what the producer did or how they went about making them. So we always wanted to get our feet dirty and our hands dirty to get in there and do it. But again, I was a photographer early on in my life, so I knew cameras. I understood how they worked and where to put them and stuff like that. So, I really wanted to be on the ground. I wanted that adventure. I didn't want to just sit in my office all the time. I wanted to be in the jungle, or in the desert, or doing all that stuff. So,
I love that. And back to the collaboration side, you would have worked with so many people along your journey, and you would have people that you just alluded to that you don't get along with, or they're maybe shooting in a way that you don't agree with. How have you been able to keep your cool? Because I used to be an accountant. With accounting, there's a right answer and a wrong answer, or maybe an answer we can kind of figure out along the way, but that's right. It's generally binary. With creativity, there's no right answer. Everyone might have a different opinion. So I'm wondering how you've been able to collaborate in that sense when maybe the director's not doing it how you want to do it, and maybe they've got more power than you, or an exec says, this is the note, you have to do it, but you feel it's taking away from the integrity of your script.
Well, those are battles that you have to be careful how you fight them. I mean, on Stakeout 2, that was one of the most memorable problems because, like I said, I never put in stuff that was of the moment.
Yep.
But Emilio Estevez wanted to put in, he was enamored with Ren and Stimpy. Now, I don't know if you remember who they are, but it was a cartoon of the early 90s. And he wanted to put in a scene about that. And I said, look, I don't think this is a great idea because where's it going to be in 10 years or 15 years if the movie holds up? If the movie is good and it holds up, it will play for a long time. If you put a bunch of stuff in that doesn't hold up in 20 years, that movie's going to fade away. Mm. So I argued against it, but John Badham did not argue against it and shot it. I argued against several scenes that were shot that I thought were over the top. I kept trying to pull it back. If you think you're making a comedy, you're in trouble. Because comedy, once you try to be funny, it's not so funny.
Yep. To be grounded.
The best way to approach a comedy is if it's a deadly serious business.
Oh, I love that.
And then it will be funny, in my opinion. So anyway, I battled with that one against the studio, against Badham, against everybody, because we had a good movie. But every time the audience thought something was funny, they said, well, we can make it funnier and put some of the over-the-top stuff in. And that's the stuff that doesn't hold up.
Agreed. Trying too hard as well.
Yeah.
So have you ever had moments where you've had to walk away and say, I'm not doing this project if you're going to go in this direction or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I've done that. I said, look, this is not the way I see it. And if you want to go that way, I'm not the guy for this project. And they usually say, all right, well, let's do it your way.
And then in terms of...
sometimes I just walk away and it's fine. And other times they change their mind. I mean, you have to be willing to walk away. If you really believe in something, you have to be willing to walk away because it's either not right for you and you're just going to get into conflict, or they'll come around to your way of thinking because they don't want to lose you.
But on the other end, being a writer, for example, it's not necessarily the most stable job. So you might not know when your next line of work's coming. And you've obviously got a lot of integrity, but you can also see how people on the other end, I've never done this, but I really resonate with what you're saying. You know when your next bit of work's going to be, you want to impress them, you want to work with them again, and just say, I'll do whatever you want, even though it goes against the core of what you're trying to achieve. So there's also that kind of...
Well, all right. So one of the things I learned, no matter how long I was in the business, if I'm writing for myself, I control everything.
Yep.
If I'm hired to write for somebody, there's the biggest problem because, all right, now you're on a project and they have a lot of ideas for you. And the one thing I've learned is you cannot tell them their ideas are bad.
Especially
it doesn't work.
Your ideas are
It doesn't work.
Yep.
So the only way you can prove to them the ideas are bad is to try to do them. And try to do them as best you can, because you don't always know. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe their idea is really good and you just have to rethink it and try to make it work. But usually that's the only way to prove an idea is bad. Now, the downside to that is they think, well, you're just not a very good writer.
Well, they might think it's brilliant, right?
I thought of it.
Yeah.
What?
Oh, they could think it's so brilliant. See, and they can go, see, look, it's amazing. You put it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's problems either way.
But also from the ego side. Now, this is something I find very interesting because we've all got an ego. We all think it should go a certain way, and we do need a bit of I'm not sure what the right word is, but it'll come to me. But we all need to be able to, if someone's got an idea, be able to hear it. But sometimes that can be hard when we're in it. We think we've thought about everything. We've written it to how we want, and then we receive an idea, and it goes against what you're writing and what you've thought about. Have you been able to manage your ego, and then I'll talk about other egos?
Well, see, that's where being a producer and director comes in handy, because being a producer and director, you always have to listen to the other people's ideas, whether it's the cameraman who has a better way to shoot it, or the actor who has come up with an idea about what to do with his character. So, and also when you're directing, you're rehearsing the scene, and you may realize, gosh, that doesn't sound as good as I thought it would, or maybe I can try to fine tune it. So there's all this malleability once you get on the floor and trying to do something. So, I learned that listen to everybody, because you don't know necessarily in our business when it gets into the mix if it's going to work. Now you can listen to some ideas that are just outrageously bad and they're not going to work. I mean, you just have to say, look, if I do that, then this is not going to hold up later on, or that's going to change the way we do things here, and the entire latter half of the script is going to have to be rewritten. So people don't always know the minor change they're suggesting, what impact it'll have on the rest of the story. So you have to be prepared to tell them, if I do that, this is all going to fall apart.
Say from the attachment side, especially as a writer, for example, or even a director or anything, when we've created something, there's an attachment to the project that we're working on. And so sometimes within ourselves, it can be hard to listen to another idea. So I'm just wondering, how have you been able to kind of manage that, or figure out you might not necessarily have the best idea, and being able to listen to others? We can listen, but sometimes we're not listening.
Yeah, but the script isn't the end.
Yes.
The movie's the end, or the TV show's the end. So until you get to that end, the script is just something that needs to be worked with the director, with the actors. So it's part of the process. The process isn't ended until it's in the theater.
Yep.
So you can't be too attached to something, because once you get on the ground floor, once you're on the floor and working this out, you discover things. You just have to be open to that.
That's where I think that's the difference between being in the industry and not being in the industry, because we've heard so many examples of where people they've got the blinkers on. It has to go this way. There's an understanding that, the script's the first thing and then the end product's actually being created. But still, I'm trying to like figure out how you've been able to, you know, thrive within the collaboration side to be able to put your hand up and say, you know what, I might not always have the best ideas. I think that's almost a taught skill, because especially when you first start out, we don't know what we don't know. And so sometimes if someone says something, we might not be able to receive it because we're so in what we're creating in at the moment.
Well, you kind of learn that in the business. Once you've seen a few movies being made or TV shows, you watch the process, because, you know, everything can change in the editing room too.
Yep.
You know, that's when you find performances and you fine tune performances and you cut out lines that don't work, or you cut out a whole scene that you don't need. So you don't always know until you get everything shot, and then it comes together. Like the example I gave you about Stakeout 2, which was in the editing room, in a first cut, we had a really good movie. But then as audiences wanted more laughs, they put more laughs in, but it was over the top stuff. So it didn't make the movie better. But that's how it changed. And that was decisions that were made on the day. It was not stuff that I had necessarily written.
So I'm wondering, you know, you put your best effort forward, you've created a really good product, and then you feel that someone's kind of, you know, changed it, messed around with it, hasn't made it as good as you would like. What's the mindset from there onwards? Like when you look at it, when you hear about it, when you see it, what's the mindset there where you know, you don't have control, they've done it, you're really proud of what you've done, you can't do anything about it. Yeah, I can see you smiling. So what's kind of the mindset there?
How much did you get paid?
You just go back to that? Because surely you'd still feel like, look what they've done.
Oh, sure, of course,
yeah.
Of course. But you know, once you sell it, you know, if it's like selling your car, you know, that person's going to do what they're going to do to that car, and you really have no say so at that point. You know, but that's the impetus for a writer to become a director and a producer.
Oh, so you can have control.
So you can have control, as much control as you can get.
Okay.
That's the only answer to that. Because then you can't complain about the director and you can't complain about the producer, because you're all three.
You just
and now you have
yourself.
No one to blame but yourself.
Yes, I love that. You've motivated me to learn how to direct. So, you know, the old writing saying, kill your babies. I would assume, especially when you've got, for example, I think you said Stakeout 2.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that saying.
Oh, okay, please. I don't either. So I'd love to know.
No, it's if the baby's good, why kill it? You know, it's not, you know, every part you put into a script is a baby at some point. You know, I mean, you started out birthing this thing. So, I mean, you don't kill your babies just because that's, you know, if you can't do that, you're not a good writer. Bullshit. You know, if you've written something good, keep it in. You know, what you should kill are the bad stuff.
I really like your mindset and philosophy on this, because you seem to be able to move forward despite, you know, we've spoken a lot about, you know, when things aren't getting made or when someone comes and said it has to be this way. Do you just absorb it? You know, you process it very quickly and then move forward and go, there's nothing I can do. They own it. Is it just an understanding? Do you not get bogged down by that side of the business?
No, because I'm already on, you know, this script is done. I'm working on 2 or 3 other things. You know, if you mess this one up, well, I got another one in the hopper that's going to get going. So, you know, I'm not a one movie career. I'm looking at as long a career as I can milk out of this business. And so if one doesn't work out, I know, you know, I'm giving it another shot. You know, my first directing job didn't work out. It was a disaster. And I thought it was going to kill me, but
Kill you in terms of career or physically?
Both. I knew it wouldn't kill me as a writer.
Yeah.
Because people liked what I wrote, but it might kill my directing career. But it was also a really tough circumstance, and it was a disastrous start in that as a director. And I was just lucky to have survived it. Everything that could go wrong in a movie went wrong.
Is there like a dot point summary or anything that you want to discuss? Because, you know, despite that, you're still done directing, you're still in the industry, which you would have thought at the time was the worst thing ever.
Yeah, well, it was miracles because we shot it in Mexico, and everything that could go wrong. I had a disaster a week. It was unbelievable. I had, in those days we shot film, and the dailies in Mexico, dailies are what you look at, or in the good old days, were what you looked at to see if what you shot the day before needed to be reshot.
Yep.
Well, our dailies had to go to New York. We didn't get dailies for 7 days. So by the time we found out something was wrong, we were somewhere else in the country.
Oh,
So I had no chance to fix anything that had been destroyed. And so we had scratched negative, we had all sorts of stuff. I go into a lot of details, but special effects that didn't work. We lost a location, a storm that came that would have been perfect. Then we had to wait, and the storm was gone, and it was just endless. So it was just a nightmare. And then I had producers who hated other producers, and other producers on drugs. It was just a nightmare from day one. But I survived it. We made the movie. It wasn't what I wanted. The studio wanted other scenes that I didn't like, and they wound up in the movie that I thought made the movie worse. There was not much I could do on that one except just, survive.
I think so many people resonate where, your first time doing something, everything seems to have gone wrong. You're also dealing with egos and conflict, which you don't have time to deal with that stuff. And also the money side, because let's say you're shooting in one side of Mexico, then you have to go to the other side of Mexico. You can't just bring all the crew there. There's just crazy. And despite all of this, despite thinking that, you're probably stressed beyond belief, pulling out your hair, just as you said, just trying to survive. But despite all of that, you're still here, and that you would have learned a lot. Did you ever think that you'd be able to tell this story without the intense stress of reliving back the traumatic experience?
Well, I knew I was learning what to do, and I did learn a lot, at the expense of that studio, because, they didn't get a good movie.
Yeah.
But we tried our best. It just everything just got in the way. Everything that could get in the way got in the way. And there was really not much I could do about it. But, and it could have sunk my career, except the next movie I had that came out was STAKEOUT, which was I think the 6th or 7th most successful movie of the year.
And you won an award for it as well.
Yeah. So, I've had every time I had a bad one, I had a great one, and then a bad one, then a great one, or a medium one, or whatever. You never know.
I really like this philosophy that you mentioned earlier about you're not just looking at the one script, you're looking at the next 4 scripts, and then you're looking at a long-term mentality, because through my experience that if you want to be doing something for the long term, we can't just have the one thing. The one script's not going to keep you going on for the rest of your career. And you obviously love what you're doing and you're passionate. But to even have that mindset of not putting all of your eggs in one basket, I think is very crucial and great life advice, not even if you're just a writer. And I had similar advice when I wrote one script and I showed it to a producer, and they basically said, what else do you have? And that kind of changed my mindset, because the script might not go necessarily how you want it, and you've given plenty of examples, but writing other stuff, not only does it give you another outlet to create something, but it makes one a better writer. So as I'm trying to get into the industry, I've been writing like 5 scripts, and they're all in completely different genres, even though I'm not quite sure I look at it via genres. And each thing has helped inform the other one because of similar advice to what you're giving. I'm a better writer if I write another script, then what I've learned from that script, I can apply perhaps to the first one. And it's a long-term thinking, which I didn't necessarily have or was aware of at the start, because I just thought you do the one script and then you kind of just hope for the next one later. I think it's
always, as a writer, it's always up to you to propel your career forward. And the only way to really do that as a writer is to write. Yes. You got to write one script after another script after that. And I knew that from, you look at Billy Wilder's career, he didn't just write one movie. He went from one movie to the next movie to the next movie to the next movie. I mean, I refer to Billy Wilder a lot because he had a lot of impact on how I decided to write. I wanted to, I understood that writing, that meant more to me than most other writing, except maybe Richard Brooks or some of the other older guys. What was I going to say about... anyway, the writing is entirely up to you, and you should not think in terms of one story. Oh, genre, that was what I was going to talk about. You know, I understand genre for people to categorize things, but as a writer, the only thing that genre means to a writer is that the rules of your storytelling change. That's it. You're still writing characters. But, you know, in let's say, science fiction, if a person dies, it doesn't necessarily mean they can't come back to life.
Yeah.
Right? In a drama, in a real drama, if a person dies, they die. So you're still writing people, but it's only the rules of the stories that changed within the genre. So it's really, if you like genre, to categorize stuff as genre, fine. But for writer, it's just your rules in writing change.
Within that story world. Exactly. It's like I was thinking you can't write Seinfeld and just have dragons. I've watched plenty of shows where, inverted commas, the genre's changed and you're like, how did this become mystical when it wasn't mystical? And it just,
Writers don't, yeah, that's the thing that bothers me most too, is the writers haven't established the rules from the get-go.
Yeah.
Because if you don't establish the rules and adhere to them, then you lose the audience. Because if the audience doesn't believe what's happening and they go, wait a minute, that's not supposed to happen, then you've lost them. You break that bond with the story.
Agreed. Like when you watch, for example, it just springs to mind, Game of Thrones, you know dragons exist. But if you introduce dragons in season 8, you just think it's ridiculous. But if dragons are established early on, you know, yeah, they're dragons. Obviously, that makes sense. And that's,
yeah. So you have to establish your rules and stick to them, whatever they are. You're going to have dragons, you can have dragons.
Our next screenplay is going to be all about dragons now and just proving the point. I just want to go back to the first time you directed. When you attach your name to something, what was the feeling there? You see your name on the project that you've done. Are you proud of it? Are you happy? What are you thinking? Despite all these things that were all outside of your control, it's not the product you want, but you got your name on it. You know it could have been better, but there's really nothing you could have done about it.
Well, see, that's the difference. There's a difference between writing and directing there. Because in writing, you can do whatever you want and say whatever you want. And, you know, you're not under any pressure or constraint by production money yet. Yep. Until you sell the project. But as a director, you know, you're responsible for what's up on screen, and it's how much can you get done in a day? How much money do you have to do what's necessary? And that becomes the most frustrating thing because, you know, if I'd only had another hour, I could have gotten that performance a little better. If I'd only had another hour, I would, if there only hadn't rained, you know, at that time, you know, you're always compromising as a director. And you hope that you're putting together a good movie. I mean, every movie I've directed, I wish I had, you know, $10,000 more to get that one extra shot or that one extra special effect. So I always look at the stuff I direct and, you know, realize I did what I could given the money I had, the money and time. But you don't have that as a writer. So I think directing is more frustrating.
Are you able to, you know, despite all of these things, are you still able to enjoy what you've done? Or are you thinking, I should have done this, I could have done that, or if I had this, I can do that?
Well, you always think, no matter what you look like, what you do in a movie, and when you look at it again, you go, you know, I had another idea, I just couldn't do it. It would have made that better. You can't get away from that.
It sounds like you're not, in a very positive way, not so hard on yourself. You understand the reality of what's happened. You still look to say what you could have done so you can improve for the next project, but it sounds like you don't beat yourself up. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah. I don't, you know, I go through life that way. I don't carry a lot of baggage. You know, I'm a very forward moving person, you know, and the stuff that is past is past. I can't change it. Move on.
But within that, I'll give you even more credit. I think that's a great way of living. It sounds like you're still able to process it. You kind of like scan for what's happened. What could I have done? Okay, I've learned, and now move forward. Is that what I'm hearing? It's not like you're just sweeping it under the rug, because that's...
No. I mean, it is what it is. It is what it is. You take responsibility for it, and you accept it, and get on to the next one and try to do better.
I love that. That is very empowering for me. You mentioned the ego side. For example, when you're directing, you said the producers don't like each other. You've also been a showrunner, which is even I don't know if it's a level ahead of being a director, but you're not just in charge. You're in charge of everything as a showrunner. And you'd have egos, you'd have conflicts. You also need to get the the product out there. I'm just wondering, now you kind of have to put on your HR hat. And you might not necessarily be something you want to deal with, because you want to make sure the script's good. You want to make sure the actors are in alignment. You want to make sure the producers are in alignment. Was that a easy, hard, challenging shift, or just it was still kind of what you were doing from the producing side, just a level above?
You know, I've never had the issue of bad behavior so much. I think if you treat people with respect and everybody knows you're trying to make the best product possible, and you give everybody the time they need to get the best job done, that's the way I approach everything. So even as a showrunner, you know, you get a lot of responsibility as a showrunner. Everything's your responsibility. And it's just a tiring job. Because we have to rewrite every script, we have to edit every show. You know, we have a good team. You rely on your team. My wife, Lynn Kouf, was instrumental in making sure everything stayed on track, and she had great insight into script and stuff like that. So you surround yourself with a lot of people that you trust, and David Greenwalt as well. But I never really had, you know, I had issues with actors if they were frustrated with other actors and stuff like that. But again, I think if you let everybody know you're going to work hard and try to make the best movie you can, then everybody's on board. I mean,
mission.
We had I know I have a story about gang related with Jim Belushi and Tupac Shakur. Tupac showed up for rehearsal before we started shooting. Showed up about 2 hours late, and Belushi was pissed.
Wow.
And I don't blame him. You know, we were all waiting. So Belushi took Tupac aside and said, "Look, man, you know, you got to show up. You got to be here. I'm here. We're ready to go to work. We're supposed to make a good movie here. You got to commit to doing this." And Tupac was never late after that, you know, and I never had an issue with him either.
I like that.
I mean,
yeah. Go on.
He did want to use real alcohol on a scene once with Belushi. And he didn't quite make it to set the next day, but
I like how you casually say, "Oh, you don't blame him, blame Jim for being angry." I would have been furious. 2 hours, everyone has to wait. I would have get fired, but I guess.
Well, we weren't shooting. I mean, it was rehearsal, so. Yeah. You know, it gave Belushi and I a chance to talk about what we were going to do and stuff like that. But he was great. I mean, Belushi was great. I mean, Tupac was young and inexperienced. It was only his third movie. And, you know, he'd say, "Look, you got to get it in 2 takes with me, because after that, I think I'm acting." Well, you know, a real actor wants that. I mean, Belushi would have gone 100 takes if I needed him to.
Yeah. So this might be hard for you to answer, but you're very calm, present. You go back to the work. You've got a forward moving mindset. Do you ever get angry on set, or when you're in the writer's room, or dealing with the producers, or what we see is what we get? It doesn't seem like much frustrates you, because you kind of understand what you...
No, I get frustrated. I get frustrated when, you know, if we have to do something, if it doesn't work. Mostly I get frustrated if a script isn't quite working, you know, because that just means, it's not that I'm frustrated with the writing. I can re-break a script. It's the time issue, because you don't have a lot of time to get that script in shape. And we were under a lot of pressure on GRIMM, especially because we had special effects and we had a lot of outdoor locations that we had to choose. So we had to take that into our mindset. We had to deliver every script a week before prep, because special effects and production needed it a week before the director got it. So we never delivered a late script. And so we were a pretty smooth ship, but that was pressure we put on ourselves to make sure those scripts got done way in advance of when they needed to be done for production.
You have a very good work ethic, because there's a lot of things that are outside of your control, and to still never like miss a deadline, that's very impressive.
No. Well, that is in our control. You know, we have to make sure. And if David and I had to work on a weekend, we'd work on it a weekend to get it done. So, but we also worked hard. We didn't mess around. I've been on a lot of shows where there's a lot of talk in writers' rooms about personal lives and stuff like that, and I don't give a damn about that. If I'm coming to work, I'm going to come to work at 9 or 10 o'clock, and I want to leave by 6 because I'm tired after that. And I'm going to work the entire time there. I'm going to work through lunch, and we're going to get this job done, but everybody can have a life.
As in outside. So what's the relationship? I always talk about play and fun. What's the relationship, for example? I've never been in a writer's room like that, for example. And how do you still foster the creativity that people can still express themselves and feel, comfortable sharing, while also knowing this is a job? And yeah.
Well, the most efficient way that I found to run a TV show was every writer got to come up with an idea. If we liked the idea, then we'd send it to the studio. If the studio liked the idea, then they got to do the outline. They would turn the outline into us, and we get the outline in shape and send it to the studio. If the studio said, okay, the outline, the writer got to do the first draft. While that writer is doing the first draft, we're on to the next one. So we had a process. Somebody's writing an outline, somebody's writing a script, and then every script, what we did for GRIMM was when we had to deliver the final script to the studio, we would put it up on a big screen TV. The writer of the script would come in the room, David and I would be in the room, Lynn would be in the room, and whatever writer wasn't working on a script or a story idea at the time was invited into the room. We went through every line of that script and rewrote that script. Everybody got to participate. We corrected all the screw-ups, we added scenes, we deleted scenes, we made it as perfect as possible. Then it went to the studio. We very seldom we only had, I think, one script thrown back out of 123. But that was the most efficient process, and that's the way it worked. It was a machine. One's doing an outline, one's doing a script, in the script, turning into the studio. The next outline's ready, the next script is ready. It's like constant. And then we would also go to the editing room.
I really like that process, and I think that's how I would do it when I have the opportunity.
Yeah, but it was really efficient, and everybody got a chance to come up with a line, suggest a scene, whatever it was, but you could see the process that way, and you could see how we changed things as we went along. Anyway, it was fun.
Okay.
Tiring, but fun.
Yes, I would imagine it's very tiring. But, it is very efficient because something's always happening. It's not just one script waiting around for the one script, which would be horrible. And people would be,
oh my God.
Yeah.
Can't happen.
Yeah.
Deadlines.
So I would imagine because you've created an environment where someone can kind of do something different all along the way, it's not just kind of the same thing. I know that might be a bit hard to kind of visualize, but someone's always doing something, whether it's an outline or sitting with you and go line by line. Was that the way that you fostered a creative environment where someone could always do something? They would have the opportunity to create if it was good or put in their 2 cents. Is that?
Yeah. And the writers on our staff weren't responsible for doing the progressive relationships with the characters. They only had to come up with the story of the week, and then David and I would do how the characters interacted and changed over the course of the series. So really, their responsibility was only for the story, and then we'd give them the character dynamics for that particular script over the course of the year, because they had no idea where we wanted to take the characters.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, of course. So did you not have would you and David just kind of figure that out by yourselves?
Well, our process was, it's because we've done so much together, our process was, a lot of it was figuring it out as we went along, because there's only so much you can do by just thinking about stuff, about where you want characters to go. We've always found that once you start writing characters, you discover things about the characters. You get to know the characters better. But until you write them and write their dialogue and write their wants and needs, you don't get to really know them. So to try to say, well, they're going to fall in love at this point in time, and they're going to do this in season 2, and they're going to do this in season 3. We knew none of that.
Yeah.
We made all that up as we went along, line by line by line, so it happened naturally as we went. And the studio gave us the freedom to do that, the studio and the network, which, was great. But I think they appreciated, David and I had enough experience at that point that I think they just trusted us to come up with stuff. And they could always complain if they didn't like something, but they seemed to go along with it. And our show was so different and unusual. I'm not sure they knew actually how to give notes anyway, because we were the Wild West.
Oh, I absolutely love that. In terms of Grimm's, as you said, a very unique show, and I haven't seen all of it through having Reggie Lee and Sasha Royce on the podcast. I've obviously looked into it,
yeah.
But it sounds so interesting. It kind of reminds me of Lost. How do you not write yourself into a wall with what you're saying? Because, you're doing line by line. You don't know what's going to happen in season 6 if you're writing season 1. There's a lot of like mystical elements. And then you if you do write yourself into a wall, you then need to figure something else out. Was that interesting for you? What was the relationship there? Because I'm sure that would have happened.
Well, that's part of writing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to, we had one scene where I said, well, David's got to do this. And Greenwalt said, well, if he does that, then they would arrest him. And I said, well, let's arrest him.
I love it.
So we just went with it. We went with the logic.
But
what makes sense?
Did you have kind of like a TV Bible of the rules of when you're introducing like different mystical characters, what they can and can't do, so that way they don't contradict each other, or you kind of knew it anyway, and when you came up, when something would happen, you just, for example, get them arrested?
I think it's more, story logic and character logic.
Yeah.
That was kind of basic. And if David and I and Lynn knew it, if our staff writers got confused, we would just straighten them out. We said, you can't do that. You have to explain. You must explain what you're doing. You can't just make shit up. We tried to base everything in science.
Yep.
Even Grimm, his ability to see Grimm's, we explained because we went into cones in your eyes. We only have so many cones in your eyes. Some people have another cone, which allows them to see a lot more colors than we do, which is real. And we just say, well, if you get another cone, you can see the psychological image inside of somebody when they change. You can see the emotional changes. And so that, we tried to take it that far.
I really like that. You're grounding a show which is very, correct me if you don't like the word, like mystical, but you're grounding it within science.
You have to ground it with science.
And history as well. I know that you talked about the history minor was very much trying to, I really like that that way of looking at it, because otherwise then it could have gone into all different places and not made sense.
No, you just, no, you got to keep it grounded.
And in terms of, I mentioned I had Sasha and Reggie on the podcast. I've had over 200 guests on the podcast, and the Grimm fans are the most loyal fans I've ever seen of any TV show. We've had people on every show you can imagine. I'm just wondering, what do you think about that? You've written a lot, but the Grimm fan base is next level. Is it something that you're proud of, to think that, you created this world and this, I can see you thinking.
Well, when you take on the responsibility of taking the Grimm stories and trying to figure out how they work, people know these. They grew up with these stories. So we're not making stuff up that nobody knows about. We tried to figure out, it all started with the big bad wolf. How do you explain the big bad wolf? He talks to Little Red Riding Hood. So how does Little Red Riding Hood understand a wolf? So in trying to explain that, that's what Grimm is all about. How do you explain that? Well, he must be a human with a wolf inside him. Right? And we always said, well, you hear people say, well, he behaved like a monster. Well, what if a monster is inside? We know that monsters live inside human beings. There are monsters out there roaming the earth. There's one running Russia, and what do they look like when their monster comes to light, when their monster is revealed? Grimms can see the monsters within people. That's why, but they couldn't tell people. I can't tell you I saw a monster inside somebody because you'll think I'm crazy. So the Grimms then wrote these tales to warn people, don't go into the woods late at night. There's a witch out there that's going to eat you. Well, what if the Grimms were right and they just figured out, okay, well, the only way we can say this is we'll write it as a fairy tale.
What a beautiful way of bringing it out so that people can see it and feel it and understand
It's very
it.
psychological, actually.
Yeah.
And we came up with Wesen, which is to be, and we tried to ground as much stuff in German lore as possible, and that's why we shot in Portland, because Portland has the forests, which were, misty and dark, and that's why we chose Portland.
That is very cool. When I have a guest on, I always ask, does the audience have any questions for the guest? And I wrote in a few of the Grimm groups, and my goodness, there's still, I just wrote, do you have any questions for you? And then it somehow goes into like 20 comments about a Grimm or what it means, and they're still discussing it. I haven't had that experience. And as I said, I've had a lot of people on this podcast who have done brilliant things. I know that you're a modest guy, but wouldn't that warm your heart to know that, the show's still finished, the show's finished, and people are still obsessed?
Oh, no, it's fantastic. Yeah, it's fantastic. I think it's because we dealt with real human issues and just gave it a different psychological face.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to absorb it, as you said, to
Yeah.
see it in a different light. Because if you just have a big bad wolf and Little Red Riding Hood, you might not be able to see it for what you're trying to ground, if that makes sense.
No, and the people who were monsters on the inside, had these monsters in them. They had real issues. They had problems. They weren't always proud of what they did, but it was in their nature to do it.
Yes.
So it was like an addiction or anything like that. I mean, these people were stuck with this personality, and sometimes they fought against it, and sometimes they went with it, and sometimes they were mean, and sometimes they were mean and didn't want to be mean. So it's like the Monroe character, he was a Blutbad, we just mashed together German words. Blutbad is not a German word, but for us it meant bloodbath.
Yep. What sounds
That's why we made Hitler a Blutbad.
There's so much from the writing side, because you're working with the network, and season one, I'm not sure if you signed for more than one season. You've gotten the role.
No. We got 13 episodes. That was it. That's all we committed to. That's why we put Hitler on the 13th episode, because if we got nothing else, we wanted to take real footage of Hitler speaking to the Reichstag and morph him into a Blutbad.
So for people that don't know Grimm, it will sound so funny, but within the nature of what you created, it is brilliant. But isn't it from the writing side and the producing side? You don't know when the next season's going to happen. And, you've created this world that you obviously love and the fans obviously love. But I think how many seasons? 6 seasons. Each season you probably have to play the waiting game. How did you find that? I know you've spoken about you've had other scripts along the way, but this is a show. I know you've done a lot, but this is a show where, I believe there's millions of people watching it or have watched it. What's the feeling there when you're waiting for it to be greenlit?
Well, it's not just us. I mean, it's the crew, it's the actors, it's everybody involved. And so, you hope the network keeps going. We knew that we were a relatively inexpensive show to produce. And, we weren't an expensive show because none of the actors were well known. I mean, they took a chance on us with basically unknown actors. A few of our actors were, like Russell was more well known, and Silas was more well known, and Reggie was more well known. But the basic group was not that well known, and they just let us run with it, and we were successful enough. They just, we're not costing them a lot of money. We're producing a pretty good product, and people seem to be watching, or enough was watching. So, but you never knew, year after year, if they were going to pick you up or not.
But I would imagine that you and David and the rest of the crew, or we'll just talk about you, would still be nervous, waiting if you're going to create the next season. Because, it's not just... Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what you want is you want the next season so you can continue the storyline, because we didn't want to end it until we actually ended it. When Bob Greenblatt told us finally, we're going to give you 123, so do what you're going to do in that last 13 episodes of season 6. So Bob gave us the go ahead to end the season the way we wanted to. That's why we were able to take it to a logical conclusion.
Very interesting. And were there ever moments when you thought the show wouldn't go ahead?
Well, you always worry about that. I mean, that's never far from you, but there's nothing you do about that. You just do the best show you can, and keep going.
I like your mentality. This is we speak about how do you thrive. This is what this podcast is about, and for you it's onwards and upwards. And
yeah,
I think it's contagious. I have a few more because I got so many questions about Grimm, but
we can do this again if you want to.
yes, we will definitely do it again. I'll just ask one before we do the rapid fire segment. You mentioned that from when you first directed, it was very taxing on you for the reasons you brought up. How taxing was this on you doing Grimm, as a showrunner and the writer, the producer, the showrunner? You've directed, I think, a couple of episodes.
Yeah, well. It was just exhausting. That was the only thing, because, David and myself and Lynn, we only got maybe 3 weeks off every year because
3 weeks. Wow.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because we were editing and preparing. And then as soon as they say you're ready to go, then we're thinking about the next year and what are we going to do in the next year? How are we going to move this thing forward? So we only had maybe 3 weeks off between seasons.
And was that 3 weeks enough to be able to deal with potential burnout?
Well, it's like marathon. You just gear up and go.
It's a long time.
You just gear up and go, and it's not as if we hadn't been writing for a long time. So we knew the routine. So that's what I mean. Go to work at 9 to 10 and home by 6.
Yeah.
That's it. And then take the weekends off unless we had to work on the weekend. So if you can do that, you're not killing yourself. You're just working a regular job, basically.
So it doesn't take over your life, which I'm sure it still
suck
did.
up your life. Because I had 4 kids too.
Yeah, that's wild.
So did my wife.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my wife worked with me, so she would handle whatever problem there was at home while I was doing the other things, and I would chip in when I could. But she had an incredible workload. Not just the studio, but the family as well.
Please only dive as deep as you would like to. How did you not only your work partners, but your life partners? Was there like a switch off button? Now we're at home and this is our private life, or was it all the same life? Like working together, was it a different hat, or you just saw it as the one?
No, we just kind of that's the way we've always been. Because we started working together before we got married.
Yep.
And so we always had this. But Lynn is a lot of fun. So,
Nice.
we kind of have the same attitude about things. So we just, not that there isn't stress or, difficult times, but it's not usually between us.
Yep.
It's either outside influences that we're frustrated with. So we've always had a good core. So we're still married. So
Congratulations. That is a big achievement.
Yeah.
What we're going to do now to wrap up the podcast is a quick rapid fire segment. So the first thing that springs to mind, but please take your time if you need to think about it. And I will not interject because I always derail them. But I think you've probably got the most fan questions we've had in a long time. So I think we'll see how many we can get through. Okay, ready to rumble?
Yep.
Would you ever consider bringing back Grimm in perhaps a spin-off form?
That's not up to us. We would, but it's the network studio decision. We have no say-so in that.
And is there anything in the works or has been in the works, or you're completely out of those conversations?
We've tried. I mean, Todd Milliner and Sean Hayes are producing partners on this, and they've tried. We've come up with story ideas, given them a movie idea, but nothing yet.
Do you think it's likely? I don't want to give anyone false hope,
You'll have to get Sean Hayes and Todd Milliner on here.
I've been trying to get Sean Hayes. He's a very busy man. Sean Hayes, the guy from Will and Grace, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
People would be very surprised to hear that he was a key component of the show. Actually, one of the questions was there anything that surprised you about Sean Hayes working with him?
No, he's, decent human being and a lot of fun. And, they didn't come up much. I mean, they helped us get the show launched and, kind of left us alone. And, they were very supportive. They were there, they were a background support, and they ran interference with the studio and the network for us.
Nice.
So they were very, they were great producing partners.
That's what you want, kind of,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When there's a problem, we put Sean and Todd on.
Deal with it. Yeah. And a similar question, working with Tupac, anything besides what you brought up today, anything that surprised you about, working with him or meeting him?
The surprise was that he didn't own anything in his life. I mean, when he came to us and said, I own nothing, Death Row Records owns everything. I get a car, but it's not in my name. I get a house, but it's not in my name. That's why he wanted to do acting, because he owned acting.
Yeah.
And that's, I understand. That was the surprising thing. Here was a guy you thought was in control of his life, at the top of his game, and he didn't feel it.
That's so interesting. I know that's a conversation for our next chat about the record labels, of how they can take everything.
Yeah.
How did you feel in the last day of set on GRIMM?
Kind of exhausted, but happy that we had been able to do what we wanted to do, and sad that we were saying goodbye to all this crew that we'd spent 6 years with, and saying goodbye to Portland. That was, we've kept in touch with a lot of people. We still talk to all the actors all the time, a lot of the directors. We've lost a couple of, one of our good friends, Terrence O'Hara, died.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
He was one of the directors we counted on. So there's been a couple of that. We've lost one of our actors. So Robert, and he played one of our cops. So, it was sad to see all those relationships, stop.
Kind of spoken about this, but how do you I don't know if the GRIMM fans contact you, but just thinking about it from the outside perspective, you've written a lot, it's hit home for so many people, but, as we mentioned, GRIMM has millions of people. What's the feeling there that you've made so many people happy? I know I said this before, but, there's millions of people still invested in the show. How does that make you feel to this day?
It makes me feel great, because, you never know if you're going to connect with an audience or not. I mean, all you can do is the best you can do and hope you find an audience. GRIMM is one of those times that you just connect with more people than you realize. And, I'm just happy we made the right choices. Because, it's a crapshoot.
A lot of things can go wrong. Or this might get you in trouble. Who's the most impressive actor you've worked with?
The most impressive actor? I mean, they're all really good. That's the thing, is some of the minor roles, I wish I could shoot them, but, everybody from Richard Dreyfuss to Jim Belushi, Tupac was, really motivated to make this happen, and all the actors on GRIMM. I've always had a lot of fun with the actors, and, Teri, Garr, and trying to think of some of the others.
On the spot.
Yeah, but I've never had an issue with anybody. I mean, sometimes I was just the writer, so I didn't have a lot of connection. I mean, I worked with Jackie Chan before he did Rush Hour, because I met with him to try to get him to do the project, and he was a lot of fun, but that was about the last contact I ever had with him, other than to give him a script. But I was off under writing other things at that point, so I wasn't on the set.
You get to meet a lot of interesting people in your line of work, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask my last 3 questions.
Okay.
I've alluded to it, but I want to know what you think. What's been your special ingredient to work all these years?
I like what I do. I just like to write. I like to create. So that's the fun part. I don't mind looking at a blank page and thinking about all right, what can I do next? So it's a challenge. It's a puzzle. you're being hired to create a puzzle, an emotional puzzle, and you're not given the top of the box to look at to see what it looks like. You have to create the puzzle and hope that you put all the pieces together in the right way.
I said I wouldn't comment, but this just makes me more excited about my screenwriting. It's very contagious, so I appreciate it. What are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of, well, all my kids and my relationship with my wife. That's been, I'm glad I was able to give all my kids what they needed to be, good, successful adults. And then I'm glad that I was able to connect with so many people on stuff I wanted to write. You know how much you can ask beyond that. Uh-oh, you froze up again.
Yeah, I missed the second half. You mentioned that your wife and kids, and that you've been able to inspire a lot of people. Is there anything else?
No, that's basically it. I've got a successful family, and all my kids seem to be successful and happy and doing what they want. We've always said, follow your passion.
Amazing. We'll have to talk about the ranch the next time. But any advice you want to give to people who want to try something different or new, but perhaps a bit fearful of doing something?
Well, why be afraid? Nobody's going to beat you for it. I mean, you're not going to go to, well, unless you're going to say, I want to try killing somebody. That would be a bad idea because you're probably going to go to jail.
Yeah.
But if you're going to do something creative, in a non-harmful way, give it a shot, and don't expect it to be great the first time out, because no artist is great the first time out, except maybe Orson Welles when he did Citizen Kane. But, he fell apart in the other way. He got not so good as he got older. But most people are the other way. They get better as they practice.
Actually, I can't help myself, but a little bit of a snapshot about the ranch, and you've got a website. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what you're doing there?
Well, because I had a ranch when I was a kid, I wanted the same experience if I had kids, because there was a certain amount of freedom that goes along with a ranch. And you learn responsibility very early on, because, if you're running around a ranch by yourself, if you get hurt, you got to figure out, because we're not there. So I think that was a great learning experience and gave them the freedom to experiment and to, see what was going on with nature and stuff like that. It grounded them too, because a ranch is a hard-working place, and it's with real life. You're out there in the woods or whatever, because we're in Montana and we back up into the national forest, so we have bear and elk and deer and all these wild animals running around.
Oh, wow.
Plus cattle, and cattle don't always like human beings, and they'll kick you if they get a chance, and the horses and stuff like that. But, Dylan, we were ready. We didn't know what we were going to do with the ranch, because, do our kids want to take over? Do they not want to take over? And Dylan stepped up and has taken over the ranch and trying to make it, take it to the next level. And so far he has. I mean, we've got a deli and a butcher shop in Missoula now, and it's a restaurant and butcher shop. So we're doing what nobody else has done, which is we raise the animals. We treat them humanely. We kill them on the ranch. They don't leave. They're never taken to a feedlot. We then butcher them on the ranch. Then he has a charcuterie shop making salami and sausages and frankfurters and all those things. And then we have the direct outlet to the consumer. So we can tell the consumer, yeah, we know where that meat comes from.
Yeah,
it's right from the ranch down the road.
Not many people
it's not
can do that.
traveling more than 60 miles. And so we are trying something different. And he's really spearheading that.
I really believe in what you're talking about from the ranch. I'll just give a quote and then we'll wrap up. But there's a quote on the website. How the animal is raised and cared for is important. It needs to be done right, and caring for the land is important too. It's all connected, and you don't do GMOs, you don't do added hormones or antibiotics. So it's a very healthy animal, which is not that common in this day and age. So I think that I applaud you for doing that as well. Before we go, and I ask how people can follow you and keep up to date with you, what is the one question I should have asked you?
I don't know. I mean, I'm open to anything. So I don't really think about asking myself questions. So,
Yeah.
oh, I know what you should have asked me. What's my favorite movie
Okay, that's a brilliant
of all
one. Who's your
time?
say that again?
What's my favorite movie of all time?
And what's the answer?
The Third Man.
And why is that your favorite?
I think it's a perfect movie. The camera is different. The story is great. It's a dark drama with humor. And one musical instrument does the entire score. A zither, which we actually used in Grimm.
I will watch this now, and I think you're going to get a big hit. You're going to get so many people watch this, and you're going to see the numbers fly up in this movie. Before we go, how can people follow you? I know you've got a book out. Is that coming out soon, or should people just go to your website?
Well, the books, like I said, I told you earlier in an email, is that I just got notes from an editor, so I'm rewriting the book based on those notes.
Nice.
So that'll just take however long it's going to take, because I'm doing a project. Once I go off strike, I'm doing a project for New Line and one for MGM. So
Cool.
I'm back at work.
We're gonna churn it out. Let's get it out
Yeah.
as well as possible.
So, and I don't know how to follow me. I'm on Instagram, but I'm not on Facebook or anything like that. I don't do a lot of social media.
Probably
It
a good
scares
one.
me.
Yeah.
It scares me.
Awesome. I will find your Instagram handle and your website, and it'll be in the episode notes below, so people can check it out. Thank you so much. You are extremely inspiring, and I love this forward-moving mindset of just, on to the next thing while still feeling it. You are a great role model for people, not only in the space like myself, but just in life. So I really appreciate your time. And
Oh, good. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. You see, I was a history minor. Once you know history, you realize, well, you can't change it. You can't drag it forward. You can learn from it and then move on.
Agreed.
I love Jim's take on creativity and moving forward. In his creativity, Jim looks at a challenge with excitement. A blank page doesn't scare him, it fuels him. Rather, he sees it as a delightful and exciting puzzle. Often people can feel overwhelmed when they have a challenge or puzzle, so to speak, and let their worries or apprehensions get in the way of creating something beautiful. Jim teaches us to see the challenge as an opportunity to do something new and exciting. He says, you're not given the top of the box to see what it looks like. You have to create the puzzle and hope you put all the pieces in the right way. Jim shows us that challenges can be exciting and worth pursuing. We don't always have a preview in life or a clear view of what is about to happen, but part of the fun is often not knowing what the end result may look like. It is up to us to put those pieces together to create the best outcome. So I'll leave you with this epic quote. Life is a puzzle. Every piece fits together to create who we are, what we do, how we feel. Every experience shapes us into who we will eventually become. Kyle. Thank you for listening to the Funny and Failure podcast, exploring the deeper side of comedy.